Hello and welcome to the NTI PodTalk. My name is Dianne and I'm Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute. Join me as I talk to interesting people in the field of health and wellness, food and farming, and anywhere else we find conversations that matter to our community. By listening, you'll learn a little about NTI and a lot about the things and people around you that make a difference for your wellness. Welcome, and let's get started. Hello there, this is Dianne Kaler, Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute, once again back for another edition of the NTI PodTalk. Today I am so pleased to be having a conversation with a local author, Jenny Powers, who is the co-author, along with Luke Comer, of the book On the Origin of Being, Understanding the Science of Evolution to Enhance Your Quality of Life. So welcome, Jenny. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So this book is sort of a long journey, millions of years journey
Yes.
through human evolution, starting with even before pre-human ancestors,
Mhm.
but pre-human ancestors to modern day humans. And it's really a journey to understand how the environment in which humans evolved
Mhm.
and how that environment influenced the evolution of humans could be
Exactly.
used still today to model what we should strive for in order to achieve maximum vitality and health. So for our listeners, that's just kind of a very brief summary of the
Right.
book,
Right.
right? But you start off very early in the book, maybe like in the first couple of paragraphs, by asking, how do we lead a good life?
Mhm.
And the, the question is based on, or I guess, ultimately the answer to that question is based on, we lead a good life by having optimal health and vitality, because that health and vitality is what allows us to pursue our dreams and our, all the things that bring other goodness to our life. So the
Exactly.
question is, how do we lead a good life? And the sort of statement about modern day life is that despite the fact that we have this huge, accumulation of all these sort of bounties of progress,
Right.
we've got lots of things and we've got money and the ability to buy things. So many people don't have what is actually necessary to lead a good life, and that is health and vitality. And that's why, we here at NTI are so interested in this book, because we talk about health and
Right.
vitality from the lens of nutrition. So first, my question is, what really prompts you to want to focus on this question? What does it take to lead a good life?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. I think we kind of started with what is a good life because a lot of people think that like the goal of life is to be happy, right?
Mhm.
And evolution didn't shape us to be happy.
Ah,
The main goal of evolution was for us to survive and produce offspring.
mhm.
And but over the course of these million years, we and as our bodies evolved in our environments, we came to this equilibrium with our environment. And this equilibrium is what allowed us to have health and well-being, to lead a good life, but not because they're happy all the time, but because even with life's going up, ups and downs and illness and not enough food and bad weather or whatever, you
Mhm.
always have the ability, because you have this ability to be in equilibrium with your environment, you have an ability to come back to this baseline and have this ability to thrive. So we wanted to make sure, so like, how do we be happy? Like 10 steps to be happy. No,
Right.
we wanted it to be more of, holistic kind of thing. Like a good life just includes everything about your life. Not just your emotional state.
Right. Right. Yeah, I love that. The other thing that you do very early in the book is you introduce this term, this word called eudaimonia.
Mhm.
Um, can you talk about what that is? And I
Okay,
absolutely love this word. I actually had never heard of it but prior to
cool.
reading your book.
Yeah.
And I love this term now. So can you talk about what that is and how that sort of encompasses, I imagine encompasses the goal of why you're writing the book?
Yeah, well, for me, I was, when I started off researching this, I like to think that I was just like the reader starting at the beginning of the book. Really all of this stuff was in front of me, and it was a blank slate for me to explore where I needed to go. And I started reading just a lot of people who influence, not influencers in terms of, nowadays, but someone like Joseph Campbell, for instance. Um, and so when I was reading The Power of Myth, because he just has this awesome view about humanity and what is really important in life. And he had this quote, and he said, I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonances with our own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. And that stuck with me because it's like this deeper kind of spiritual almost thing where you're connected mind, body, soul, and you're just looking to find those moments where you just love being alive. Um, and so that's not necessarily eudaimonia, but that kind of led us down this path of like, what's a word to describe that feeling? Um, and so eudaimonia came up, and eudaimonia was used a lot with the ancient philosophers and stuff, and it means the highest human good and a condition of human flourishing, so living a deeply satisfying life, a full life. um, and we'd like to add, what we talked about before, the ability to weather the storms of life and still come back to that deeply satisfying life.
Mhm.
So investigating this word, this really cool word, I ran across this paper from Richard Ryan. It was in the Journal of Happiness in 2008. And he said that eudaimonia is the process of fulfilling or realizing one's true nature, fulfilling one's potential, and living as one was inherently intended to live. And so this is what's like, boop, 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 like, what is more inherently intended? Like, intended than the way nature shaped us to live in this world. It is
Mhm.
so inherently intended that so I feel like, kind of going down this path of trying to figure out what the right word is, and then coming across this, like, it's what living as we were inherently intended to live. That just screamed at me, like, this is what evolution is. Evolution is living, or is made us to live as we inherently intended to live.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of how we got into that term eudaimonia, and why I feel like it is a really good all-encompassing term that really gets to the heart of what we're trying to say in our book.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love the word flourish. So, when we add this condition of human flourishing as the definition of eudaimonia, I love that. Love everything about it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, flourishing is a great word too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, this brings us to this conundrum because we've got what evolution sort of the path that evolution laid us on to
Mhm.
become. And then we have the modern world that we live
Mhm.
in,
Yes.
which unfortunately is, a diversion potentially from that evolution. And so, you guys talk about in the book, and I've seen it in many other
Mhm.
places, that we are
Right.
now living in a state of evolutionary mismatch. So
Mhm.
can you explain what that means? How do we discuss and lay this foundation of what evolution
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I like to think of it as that we're still running our Paleolithic gene software. Like, if our genes and the expression of our genes is our software, we're still running Paleolithic software, because it takes, you know, hundreds of thousands of years for adaptations and genetic changes to like reach every member of the species, right? And it's only been about 10,000 years since 10 to 12,000 years since the agricultural revolution. And that's when things started to deviate. Um, but even more so, I think then the agricultural revolution, about 200 years ago, the industrial revolution, I
Mhm.
think that's what made us do the biggest swerve,
Yeah.
because I think that is what made our environment change like exponentially. So basically, the environment we live in and our genetics, we didn't evolve in our current environment. This is not our natural environment. I think humans are the only species that can survive not living in their natural environment because
Mhm.
of our intelligence and adaptability. But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that we have necessarily have a good life in this new place. Um, because our new life or the modern world has us living differently than we did. So it's not like the really good thing about humans is that we have this mismatch, but we don't have to wait for our genes to evolve to adapt to the modern world, right? We have our brains and and hopefully when someone reads this book, they have the knowledge of the why things happen, so we can make the choices to bring some of those things back into our lives,
Mhm.
to realize, well, why do people tell me to get sunlight in the morning and not to have blue light in the evening? Well, there's an
Mhm.
evolutionary reason why to do that. So that in every this book particularly focuses on kind of the basics of life. It focuses on sleep and nutrition, work and rest, and our connection with nature. Um, so there are ways that we used to live that we can just use it, be like, oh, I want to try this and bring it in and try it and see how it works. Um, so that was kind of our when we talk about the evolutionary mismatch, we wanted to make sure people understood what those were, how far we have deviated, like you said, and then what are some tools that we can give people to try to because we don't want to go back to living 15,000 years ago. I want to live in
Right.
the modern world,
Right.
but we just have to make better decisions. And I think to make better decisions, we need to know why. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, because there's all kinds of uh quotes, but if you understand history, you understand how not to make the same mistakes that
right,
people made, but also how to do things appropriately,
right,
based on what history was. So,
right.
yeah, so all four of these topics are really interesting. Sleep, nutrition, as you said, work, rest, and then interaction with with the natural world. And we don't have a lot of time to talk about all four of those areas
Correct.
today.
Right.
And because we are a nutrition
Mhm.
focused school, we're really going to focus on nutrition. And nutrition
Yes.
just happens to be the longest chapter in your book. I think it was something like almost
It
100
was
pages.
the very longest chapter,
Yes.
yes, because
Yeah.
nutrition
Yeah.
is so
So,
complex,
and
as
I,
you
I
know.
think that really speaks to the point that nutrition, um, you know, we here in a nutrition school sort of like to think that nutrition is the key thing. And of course it's not, but it certainly is a major pillar of
Oh, yes.
health, wellness, vitality, having a good life, all those things, because we
Yeah,
eat, 3 times a day or twice a day or however many times
right.
people eat, and every time we eat, we have a choice about the food that we eat. And
Mhm.
so nutrition is really important. So that's what we're
Yeah.
going to spend a lot of time talking about today. But um, I just have to say that I am so happy that in your sleep chapter, you advocate the use of naps, because I am a nap lover. I don't get to take naps that often,
Me
but
too.
when I do, it always feels like such a luxury. Like, oh my God, I just love this. So
I'm
I
so
love that you
glad.
advocate naps.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
so it's funny when you talk about nutrition and in the context of our book, and people always say you are what you eat. Well, what we eat are the building blocks that our bodies require to function. But what I like to think of is we are what we evolved to eat, because there's a nutrition and our evolution are so intricately linked together. Because in order for like our brains to get bigger, we there had to be nutrition available for us to fuel it, right? And then we found the nutrition for our brains to be able to function at a higher level and take up more of our energy. And now we have more intelligence. Oh, so now we can actually learn different foods and different ways to process them. So then we have even more nutrients available to us. So the evolution, the evolution of even a bigger brain was possible because the nutritional basis was there. So it's this really cool interaction and almost like this positive feedback loop between
Mhm.
nutrition and evolution.
Yeah. Well, and that is one of my the topics that I really want to talk about because I am in no way an expert or have any depth of you know authority or knowledge in evolution or anthropology, archaeology, anything like that. But when I was in college, I used to take anthropology and archaeology classes as electives just for fun when I had the time to do it, because it is a fascinating subject to
Oh,
me.
yeah.
Um, and so, I want to come back to this sort of synergistic relationship that you were just talking about, how as the diet change. So, you start off, as I mentioned, you start off talking about pre-human ancestors.
Mhm.
You go to very early pre-human ancestors, then go into the pre-human ancestors, Australopithecus, Homo erectus, and then finally to Homo sapiens, which is what we are now. And
Mhm.
I can't remember when Homo sapiens came onto the scene, but something like 1.5 million years ago. I can't remember when it was, but anyways, so we've been around for a long time,
Yeah,
but
hundreds of
there was,
thousands of
but
years.
there were these beings that lived
Mhm.
prior to that for even longer than
Yes.
what we have been here.
Yes, exactly.
And their diets adjusted or had to change based on the climate
Mhm.
and the region and volcanoes and things that were
Right.
happening in their environment that changed their climate. So um and I have been really interested for a long time in understanding what were the foods that our pre-human and human ancestors ate that actually contributed to the growth of the brain that allowed us, because we now have a larger brain, to
Mhm.
seek new foods
Yeah.
to improve things about our biology, to cause progression of evolution to where we are now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very much of a synergistic relationship. So I would love if you could talk about what were some of the changes that
Okay.
actually dietary changes
Mhm.
that actually contributed to that brain growth.
Yeah, yeah. So humans split from other apes, the common ancestor between humans and chimpanzees and bonobos, I think was around 7 to 5 million years ago. So at that time, that's when the Great Rift separated East and West Africa. And on the west side, conditions kind of stayed the same, tropical rainforest. So those ancestors got to keep eating their fruit. They didn't have very much fat in their diet. They ate leaves. They had some animal proteins here and there, but not very much. On the eastern side, though, the climate changed and we lost all of the trees in favor of shrubs and grasslands and deserts. And we lost that principal food source of fruit. Um, and so we had to adapt. Otherwise, we would have died off long, long before. So there are some things that really helped. Like we evolved bipedalism to help us get from food to food. Um, and on these, in these shrublands and grasslands, a lot of foods that we didn't really have before, like tubers, complex carbohydrates, and more animal fat. There were bigger animals on the plains that they might try to eat us. So we needed
Mhm.
to, evolve ways to survive that. But we also needed to evolve our intelligence to to help us, because the cool thing about humans and about kind of as this journey goes along is we don't have to wait, like we said before, we don't have to wait for our bodies to adapt. We can adapt with our intelligence. And so what
Mhm.
was key to the evolution of our line was being able to get the foods in this new environment as it continued to change. And like you said, it had to do with the brain. So the brain takes about 20 to 25% of our energy needs as adults. And it's something like 16 times the energy required of muscle tissue. And so what really had to change is we had to find very nutrient dense food, um, something with a lot of complex carbohydrates to fuel our brains, because our brains only use glucose as their major fuel source. But we also needed, in order to maintain our bigger brains as they're getting bigger and bigger, we also needed to have more complete fat.
Mhm.
And that involved eating more
Mhm.
animal fat. So kind of as we kind of went through Australopithecus and then to the Homo family, and
Erectus,
Homo
yeah.
erectus, we continued to eat more and more nutrient dense food. So more and more complex carbohydrates, more and more animal fat. And these things are what allowed us to have our bigger brains. And then once we started getting like to Homo erectus, we're pretty smart by now. We started using fire. And even before that, we started using processing techniques. So now we can cook food, we can grind food, we can really get those nutrients available to us to be absorbed into our bodies to help our brains. Interestingly, one of the organs that shrank a whole lot to feed our brains were our guts, our
Mhm.
large, small intestines, and our colon.
Mhm.
And what was also really important is because now our guts were shorter. So not only did we need these nutrient rich foods for our brains, but we needed our bodies to be able to absorb them faster and more efficiently because
Mhm.
our guts were shorter. We needed less time for it to get in our system. Um, and that's where I think a lot of people don't understand where our um, our gut microbiome becomes so important. Because even though we were increasing like our complex carbohydrates and our animal fat, um, and getting complete protein, we were still consuming a lot of fiber. Um, so we don't eat as much fiber as, say, chimpanzees, who are kind of like maybe closer to our common ancestor. Um, but we now know the importance of our gut microbiome. So maintaining that access to fiber and not processing the fiber out was very important in our evolution as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, uh, yes, that's all in alignment with what my understanding is. So
Okay.
I'm so happy that you validated what I believed that that was true. So, and then you refer in the book to one of my favorite books, Catching Fire,
Yeah,
by Richard Wrangham.
yeah.
I just love that book because it kind of goes through all this, and he really makes the point that when you know pre-human ancestors, Homo erectus, I think it was the Homo erectus that discovered how to use fire to prepare food. That was really the spark that contributed to brain growth, because by cooking food, it frees up more nutrients, it sort of pre-processes, it makes them more easily digestible.
Mhm.
And that was really the the main thing that contributed to the rapid rise
Mhm.
in brain size.
Yeah. Well, also that it's really funny too, because cooking food also freed up time. We didn't have to spend as much time chewing.
Yes,
And so we
yes.
had more time to socialize, because the social aspect of our ancestors is very integral to our evolution as well. Um, and we talk about it a little bit later. We have a couple other books that are coming along in the series that talk more about social and cultural things. Um, but I think that, food getting and being safe when you sleep and cooperating when you work, all of those things require a social group. And so, and the social group also is what contributed to us being able to fuel our brains and find these foods. Nutrition and our brain growth and our evolution and brain growth are integrally tied. But as our brains got bigger and we became more social with other people, that's another way that we could fuel our brains to make our brains bigger so we could learn how to be social, so we can learn people's names, so we can learn how to transmit information. So that's another key evolutionary thing that our big brains allowed us to do.
Yeah,
And cooking food and
yeah,
the time it
yeah.
took for us to find food and eat food, there was more time for us to hang out with people.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Yeah. And now people complain that cooking takes too long. Right? They don't want to cook because it takes too long, but actually, well, they look for other people to cook for them,
Right,
eating
right.
out, but whatever. But the amount of time that it takes to cook a meal, is, it only adds to the benefits of eating the meal. So,
This is
um,
true. And maybe the problem isn't that it takes too long to cook, is that there's not enough time because they're too busy doing other things that they need to not be quite so busy doing.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So you mentioned the agricultural revolution, which happened, 10,000 or 12 to 10,000 years ago. So prior to that, for the vast majority of the time that we have been on this earth, our pre-human and human ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They would, find food as they were traveling, or on their migratory routes, following animals, and about 10,000 years ago is when they started settling down and was the advent of agriculture. So that you already mentioned that the agricultural revolution was one of the pivot points that sort of started this alteration of the trajectory of, diet and even cultural evolution. So how did the diet change? What are some of the highlights of how the diet changed
Yeah.
during that time
Well,
period?
I think a lot of people assume like, oh man, once we got agriculture, we had it made. It was an improvement. But that was not how it happened.
Yep.
It did increase the amount of food that we could produce. And so we were able to have more people being born. But for the first few thousand years, like our life expectancy went down because of the toll that it took on not only our nutrition, but like you said, our social groups. So one of the things that agriculture did was completely decrease our lack of variety and diversity in our foods. Oftentimes there'd be one staple crop, and that's what people ate, with maybe a little things here and there. But also they had one staple crop. What would happen if there was a drought, or, there was a famine? They didn't have anything to fall back to. So that would be a horrible way to decrease your lifespan. So, and then with these big plots of land, everyone got shoved together. More and more people were together, and so diseases happened that we never encountered before, or diseases that would maybe just get a couple of people, but not the kind of plague, transmission to multiple people that would happen in these closed quarters. And then we had these plots of land with food that we had to watch and grow and maintain for months and months and months and months and months in order to get the return on our investment. So now we had to defend it. We had to build walls. We had to fight other people because now there was limited resources. I mean, we had vast resources, but everyone wanted more land so they can have more people, so they can make more food so they can have more people. So that caused warfare. Whereas when we were small band hunter-gatherers, sure, there was conflict, but not necessarily over like not this kind of like land
Mhm.
conflict, because
Mhm.
they didn't really have land. I mean, they had like territories and stuff, um, but it was different than like this land is mine and this land is yours.
Mhm.
And we got land ownership. So now we had a high class and a low class, and the lower class people got all the crappy food. And the higher class people still could afford to hire people to cook and to hunt and to do all of these things that the upper class could do.
Mhm.
Um, so the loss of variety, the narrowing of and risk of famine, the social classes, the diseases, the warfare, all of these things decreased our life expectancy for quite a long time. Um,
Mhm.
and so it wasn't necessarily an improvement. The only reason why I like this, have you read Sapiens by Noah Harari? Um,
Mhm.
he said that, agriculture and this make more food, have more people, we have more people, we have to make more food. It burned our boats. We couldn't go back. We had to continue on this path of agriculture. Um, and so we were kind of on this ride, and unfortunately now we can like look back and we have science and we have lots of things that we understand a lot more, so we can prevent some of those things from happening.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think you mentioned in the book that the life expectancy declined down to 20 or something like that.
It was
And
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, and previous to that, I think a lot of people just assume that, they may acknowledge that, oh yeah, you know, life expectancy was really low, 20, 25 at best. You're an extremely old person if you make it to 30. But they assumed that that was the same case for
Right.
hunter-gatherers, and it wasn't. Hunter-gatherers had more vitality and had
Right.
more defenses against, as you say, infection and reduction in access to food, because they would move around where
Mhm.
they would follow the
Right.
food, whereas people who were farming didn't have anywhere to go to follow that food, because they probably lost some skills, some knowledge
Oh, yeah.
about how to access food. And I think it's so important to recognize that that they lost nutrient density. The hunter-gatherer diet was much more nutrient dense.
Exactly.
Um, yeah.
And yeah, and what was I going to say? Um, oh, I totally lost it. Life expectancy. So hunter-gatherers, were still susceptible to disease and injury, and infant mortality was pretty high.
Mhm.
But what was cool, and we talk about this in the child rearing section, people didn't have, 5 kids under 5. People had one
Yes.
kid under 5, right?
Right.
And so um, the the chances that that kid would get what it needed to survive into adulthood, was a lot higher. And because they would survive, that we didn't have to, and we had enough food, we didn't have to like just be baby making machines and
Right.
to get more people to help us make more food. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I think the hunter-gatherer life expectancy is very similar to like a more of a modern life expectancy. Once you get past those important years,
Mhm.
not only are you alive, but yeah, you don't have the diseases of modernity. Hunter-gatherers didn't have heart disease, they didn't have
Mhm.
obesity, they didn't have diabetes, they didn't have all of these diseases of modernity that have, I think most of what people go into to see the doctor now is something that we never used to get,
Right.
right? I mean, yes, infections and things like that. Hunter-gatherers still had to deal with infection, not in
Mhm.
closed spaces and, that kind of thing, but they were healthy up until their deaths,
Mhm.
they had that vitality and eudaimonia, and that
Yeah.
the ability to maintain equilibrium.
Yes.
And not only that, the older people now really helped with the child rearing and the food gathering. So it's
Mhm.
not only was their health really important and really good, but their
Mhm.
contributions to the group we're still vital.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why I think there was a lot of, again, we talk about this later, but the respect for the people who've been there for such a long time, and the wisdom and the things that they would pass down um, were so vital for our survival too.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember reading in your book, but you're familiar, I'm sure, with the grandmother theory about
Yes.
how, the reason why women go through menopause in what is now middle age,
Right.
um, uh, is so that there is an intention for them to stop having their own children, because now their existence, their purpose in life is to help raise their grandchildren, so that
Yes.
their children, the parents of their grandchildren, can continue doing those things, going, finding the food, and
Hmm.
doing the minimal processing that they had, and doing all those kinds of things, and protecting their community and that kind of stuff. And the grandmothers were the ones who ensured that the children actually survived. So
Yeah. Yeah, we
um
talk a lot about that in the next
oh,
book,
nice. Yeah.
because we talk about social groups and the sexes and child rearing. Those are the three main topics that we talk about in the next one.
Yeah.
And and yeah, it's really fascinating to see how women evolved before we had we're totally going off on a tangent.
I know.
But before we had monogamous relationships with men, women helped women raise children,
Yeah,
right? It
right.
was, you see this, or like the sister would help their mom, or the daughter would help their mom raise their sister. Um,
Yes.
so all of these mechanisms, and menopause is that way too, for women to maintain the ability to help women. Uh,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
so this narrative that women have always been against each other bothers me.
Yeah. Well, and the narrative of once women reach menopause, they are
Oh,
worthless, and
oh gosh,
there's
yes.
no place for them in society, bothers me.
Right?
As a postmenopausal woman, that bothers me.
I'm
So
getting there. I'm getting there. But it's
yeah.
funny because I feel like right now I'm in the prime of my life, and I feel like this is, I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
finally becoming who I wanted to be when I grew up. And
Yeah.
it just took a while.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, that's a conversation maybe for another day when your next
Yeah,
book comes out. But
exactly.
back to the topic at hand in this book. So you mentioned um, that we have now in this life of modernity, all these chronic diseases, the cardiometabolic diseases, obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, kidney disease, all these things. Um, and uh, you know, probably one of the biggest contributors to where we are now was, as you mentioned, that industrial revolution that happened. Um, I'm bad with assigning dates to particular things, but it was like 80 years ago or something like that. Or well, I guess in the 1800s, but
Right.
it really started occurring in our foods, at least in this country, like 80 to 90 years ago in the early 1900s.
And when everyone started migrating to cities and stopped
Yeah,
making their own food.
yeah. Um, so, just to kind of introduce my next question. So the way the diet changed, foods became more processed. So we lost a lot of the fiber that you were talking about that's
Mhm.
necessary for improving or maintaining and sustaining our gut microbiome at the health status that it needs to be. Refined oils, refined sugars, refined grains, these things were major players in the diet in the early 1900s to mid 1900s, and those things still exist today. So we've got this, what's now called this ultra processed foods diet, being it's pretty well discussed that this is the root of chronic disease. As much as they try to find genetics, tie
Right.
chronic disease to genetics, it really
Right.
has to do with this ultra processed food diet that we have. So,
Mhm.
so your book is making the argument that if we go back to more of an ancestral-like diet, it
Mhm.
will help us bring, regain the alignment with our evolutionary-based biology. So
Mhm.
what needs to change? What kind of things do we need to do to make
Yeah.
changes to get back to that ancestral diet?
Well, if you think about it, um, aside from the occasional honey and maybe syrup, there is no species in the entire world that evolved in the presence of that much refined sugar.
Hmm.
Um, and so w- all this refined sugar, ultra processed grains, ultra processed oils, to our bodies, to our genetics, they're completely foreign. It's like artificial dye. I mean, people think like, oh, trans fats and artificial dyes, those are man-made. We don't know what to do with them. Our bodies don't know what to do with them. Well, we also never evolved to deal with the things that we started getting 90, 100 years ago, after when the
Hmm.
Industrial Revolution and food and corporations took over our food making, and we
Hmm.
stopped making food ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think it's important for people to realize that we're we're not equipped to handle these things, and so we need to help our bodies out by handling these things with our behavior.
And our intelligence.
Yeah, yeah. And just realize that, okay, what I'm putting in my body now, yes, it'll help me to live. It'll give me fuel, it'll give me some building blocks, but it's not going to help me live well, and it's not going to help me have the kind of healthy longevity that I want to have in my life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's really all about decision making. But to return to the kind of the original question, whole foods. We never stripped things out of our food before we ate it.
Hmm.
And so this goes to plants and animals. We ate
Hmm.
organ meat, we ate connective tissue, not just the
Hmm.
muscle meat that looks pretty.
Hmm.
Um, but we also, we ate the skins, we ate the seeds, we ate everything.
Hmm.
And so really thinking about whole foods is an important start, I think. Um,
Hmm.
and whole foods and complex carbohydrates that have a lot of fiber. I think those are the places to start. Um, and it's not necessarily that every single meal has to have all of these things, but over the course of a week, we need to make sure all of these things are included. We need to make sure that we have complete protein,
Hmm.
whether it be meat, eggs, dairy, or if you're vegan, combinations of grains and legumes, because we have to have both the essential amino acids and the non-essential amino acids. So we have to make sure our fats, or our proteins are on board.
Hmm.
As for fats, hunter-gatherers had a variety of fats, and it wasn't processed fat.
Hmm.
It was just naturally occurring fat in animals, in fish, in seeds, in nuts, and things like that.
Hmm.
So people, I think, have fat gets a bad rap, um, but I think as long as you're eating your fats in like kind of equal ratios, you're not eating just one kind of fat. I think so many people either eat too much saturated fat or too much polyunsaturated fat, and that's what's causing issues. Also, I think the polyunsaturated fats that we are consuming, their omega-3, omega-6 ratios are very different than the omega-3, omega-6 ratios that we had when we were evolving too. So keeping in mind, like, okay, our body needs all three kinds of fats to function. And we especially need to increase our omega-3 intake, to
Hmm.
counterbalance that omega-3, omega-6 polyunsaturated fat mismatch. So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just thinking
Totally
very
agree. We
simply.
are here at NTI, we are fans of including dietary fat as well as organ meats. At least I talk about organ meats maybe a little bit too much, but organ meats are also a favorite here.
Right.
Yeah, so something that I find just so interesting is that humans are the only animals that need to be told what to eat at this point. I mean, during
Right,
hunter-gatherer times, humans knew what they needed to eat, right?
right.
But here now in our modern life, we have to be told what to eat.
Mhm.
There's any other animals, wild animals, even domesticated animals, they can pretty much figure out what they need to be eating. As long as they don't live in captivity and whatever. So it is so interesting that we have to be told what to eat. And now we live in an environment where one of the biggest messengers of what to eat, being told what to eat, is corporations. So can you talk a little bit about the corporate influence
Mhm.
in our diets and how that is really diminishing our diet and the
Right.
connection with our evolutionary needs?
Okay. Yeah, that's such a good point. I think it all goes back to we used to everyone used to be involved in our foodways. Everyone
Mhm.
knew what foods were available. Everyone knew how to cook them, how to butcher the animal, how to eat this meat, how to process this food, and then they all ate together. Um, and as corporations took over the making of our food, we moved into cities and we totally lost touch with where our food comes from. Um, and that's when we forgot how to eat because we forgot what food was, right? Food isn't something that you find in a grocery store. Food is what's grown out in nature, you know?
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think the first thing that I think is really important for people to kind of get back to is to understand where our food comes from. Because there's lots of undercover, uh, video documentaries about like that are horrifying
Sure.
of where our
Yeah.
food comes from. But more people need to, in order to actually change the food that's becoming available to us, people need to understand where our food comes from. And as for
Yeah.
corporations, the bottom line for corporations is the bottom line.
Yeah.
The corporations are there to make money, not to nourish us with good food.
Yeah. They are profit driven.
Yeah, so whatever makes them the most money is what they're going to advertise as being the best for you.
Mhm.
And ultra processed foods are cheap and they're easy to make. They have long shelf lives. They're easy to ship. With all the preservatives, I mean, they can last forever.
Mhm.
Um, and so those are the foods, unfortunately, that the corporations make the most money on.
Mhm.
And people, not only is advertising trying to help people say, "Oh, this is better than X because of this," and they don't even necessarily have regulations on the claims that they make.
Yeah.
But there are food scientists out there who are like, "How can we make this more palatable? How can we make this people
Right.
crave this?" And
Right.
so we do have evolutionary mechanisms in our brain to make sure we get enough sugar and fat. And so here are these foods that give us sugar and fat and we're like, oh yeah, and it's processed and it's
Yeah.
but we're getting that feedback mechanism in our brain with like the dopaminergic system in our brain. People are learning how to hijack that, so it's almost like you become addicted to it.
Mhm.
And so you need more and you need more and you need more.
Mhm.
And so not only are they like making bad food, they're advertising it to us as being good for us, and
Mhm.
then they're manipulating the food so we'll buy more of it. Um, so I think people really need to get down and learn it. And I think this is the problem since we're not raised around our foodways anymore, and there's no education with kids about we get like the plates and like, oh, you need this much protein and you need this much things, but they don't understand where it comes from. Um,
Mhm.
and so I think that starts with education.
Mhm.
And we're not going to change. The only way we can change corporations is to use our pocketbooks and to stop paying
Absolutely. Yeah.
what they're giving us.
Yeah.
So education, and then vote with your money. Don't
Mhm.
don't support those big
Mhm.
corporations. And it's interesting because if you don't support those big corporations and you start returning to your foodways, you're going to start supporting local farmers, local people, in your community who are growing food that is fresh and organic. And so there's a lot of, we kind of decentralized food. And I think it's important for us to kind of centralize it back into our communities again
Mhm.
for just for sustainability, for our community, for there's so many things that would do for us, to take that control out of the corporation's hands.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Yeah, there are so many things wrong with our current food system, and but we do have a lot more control than we
Mhm.
realize, or than a lot of people realize. So,
Yep.
as you say, vote with your checkbook. So,
Yeah. Well, and there are a lot of
um,
voices out there, podcasts and people on social media who are trying to re-educate people. And so
mhm,
the more that I'm out there and in this health and well-being space, I
mhm,
see it and it gives me
mhm.
hope.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I could talk more, but
I
we have
could too.
already surpassed the time that I
I
said that
know.
we would take. So, once again, the book is titled On the Origin of Being, Understanding the Science of Evolution to Enhance Your Quality of Life.
Yep.
My guest is Jenny Powers, who is a co-author of the book. And Jenny, this has been so interesting. We'll have to, as I said, talk again once you guys have consecutive books coming out in your series.
That'd be great.
And, we didn't talk about the other topics that you talk
Right?
about in your book, the sleep, the work rest, the interaction with natural world. So people will have
Yeah,
to go out and get your book
that would be great.
to
Yeah,
yeah,
it comes out.
to read about that. So how can they learn more, and where
Yeah.
what are all your online connection points for
Yeah,
accessing the
yeah.
book?
So we have a website, www.ontheoriginofbeing.com. And that has information about Luke and I, and our book actually comes out next Monday, June 24th. And it's where online retailers, it's so Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all those places that you can buy books online. You can buy it there. It's also available on Kindle. If you want to follow us on Instagram, we're at On the Origin of Being. And it's the same thing with Facebook. And if you happen to be on LinkedIn, uh, I am Jenny Powers at LinkedIn. We don't have a book page on LinkedIn, but it's my page. So reach out with any questions or comments or whatever. I'd love to connect with people who want to talk about this more, because this has been a really great conversation for me too. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And it's a really good book for anyone who's really interested in this evolutionary mismatch and what we can do about it. So I highly recommend it. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, Diane Kaler here again. If you found this conversation interesting and haven't already become a student at NTI, check us out at ntischool.com. We hope to see you soon.